Hey guys, I haven't made a video in a while. So I'm sure a lot of you know about RuPaul's Drag Race, a reality show created by the RuPaul Charles, where drag queens compete against each other for the possibility of winning $100,000 and a sickening supply of Anastasia Beverly Hills cosmetics. So despite being pretty trashy and manipulated, and having a super toxic fan base, this show can be credited for bringing a lot of awareness and understanding to LGBT people, particularly those who experiment with gender presentation. The show is currently on its 13th season, not including several seasons of All-Stars. All-Stars being the seasons where they bring back people that we could stand to see a second time. And the show has expanded to other countries like Thailand, the UK, Canada, Spain, Holland. I think it's fair to say that Drag Race has exposed an entire generation to a subculture they probably wouldn't otherwise be aware of. But Drag Race doesn't come without its flaws. And a glaring one is that across every incarnation of this show, a drag queen who is also a transgender woman has never been cast. At least not without being closeted. Now first, I don't think most people watching this are going to need this explanation, but just in case, I'm going to explain the difference between a drag queen and a trans woman like it's 1993.
Here's a lovely divinity, man or woman!
A transgender woman is someone who was assigned male at birth, but has transitioned and now lives their life as a woman, because they are one. A drag queen is someone who dresses up in a costume to perform gender, usually for the purposes of self-expression or entertainment. A drag queen could be a transgender woman, but them performing in drag would be entirely separate from their gender identity. Drag is something you do and take off at the end of the night. I know I can't wait to take this off. But being a transgender woman is just something you are, 24/7. It doesn't come off. Today, I think these two things are pretty obviously distinct. But just a few decades ago, these concepts were very closely linked. And by the average person, they were basically used interchangeably. And a lot of this comes from the fact that historically, trans women have been so persecuted by society that if they chose to transition and live life as themselves, they had very few career opportunities. So most of them would support themselves by performing as kind of a drag queen showgirl or doing sex work. Frankly, I think both being a drag queen and transgender was so taboo for so long that probably only the trans women had the guts to do it. A cis man like myself who wanted to try to do drag would probably think, well, it's not worth it. And so a lot of people even credit trans women for originating the art form. Today, things are slowly getting better for trans women, so they don't have to choose between the two careers anymore, drag queen, showgirl, or sex worker, but there is still a very large presence of trans women in the drag scene, all of which have been repeatedly overlooked for RuPaul's Drag Race. So with drag queens and transgender women being so linked historically, and trans women being such a significant part of the drag scene, I personally find it pretty odd that RuPaul insists on not including them in his show. And it feels strange that someone like RuPaul, who has changed the world to be more accepting of gender nonconformity, and has spent most of his life around drag queens, many of whom are trans women, would be so stubborn against an issue that even seems to go against his own message. Over the years, Ru has given a lot of interviews about why there are no trans women on his show. I think most of this discourse started around season 5, when the contestant Monica Beverly Hills made a confession during her season that she was a trans woman. And the way she did it implied that she thought that she would be disqualified because of this. In the finale of season 5, they expanded on this a little bit, where Monica explained the difference between a drag queen and a trans woman, which I actually really liked. I'm glad they did this.
Yes. Drag is what I do, trans is who I am.
All right.
At the time, I think it was something that actually really needed to be clarified to the audience. Around season 5 was when Drag Race started to get a lot more popular, and there was a lot of new viewers who probably didn't know a whole lot about the drag scene or trans women. Remember, this is back in 2013? During this finale, Ru even said to the audience that trans women are not excluded from the show.
The only requirement for being here is the desire to be America's next drag superstar. And the only thing we screen for is charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent.
Awesome. So it's settled. But this is season 5, and we're now on season 13. And there has still not been one trans woman cast without them being closeted. It wasn't until 4 years later on season 9 that we had the next trans contestant, Peppermint. And once again, she was cast under the impression that she wasn't trans and had to make the announcement mid-season. After the season ended, Peppermint placed second. I know you thought it was Shay, but it's technically Peppermint. Ru revealed his actual thoughts on Peppermint and trans women doing drag in general. In an interview with The Guardian, Ru said this.
It's an interesting area. Peppermint didn't get breast implants until after she left our show. She was identifying as a woman, but she hadn't really transitioned.
And when asked if he would cast a trans woman, he replied,
Probably not. You can identify as a woman and say you're transitioning, but it changes once you start changing your body. It takes on a different thing. It changes the whole concept of what we're doing. We've had some girls who have had some injections in the face and maybe a little bit in the butt here and there, but they haven't transitioned.
So this is the issue for Ru. He thinks that being on his show as a trans woman with titties would be an unfair advantage. He goes on to say that
drag loses its sense of danger and its sense of irony once it's not men doing it. Because at its core, it's a social statement and a big fuck you to male-dominated culture. So for men to do it, it's really punk rock, because it's a real rejection of masculinity.
And after facing backlash for these comments, he doubled down in a tweet that said,
You can take performance-enhancing drugs and still be an athlete, just not at the Olympics.
So I don't want to outright cancel RuPaul for being transphobic, because I don't think that convinces anybody. What I'd like to do is focus in on what he believes and rationally explain why it doesn't make any sense. I can see why some people who don't know the ins and outs of the show might think there's something to this comparison with athletes, thinking like, of course trans women can't be on the show. They're gonna steamroll the competition with their massive titties. But this isn't RuPaul's passing race. The catchphrase might be, may the best woman win, but RuPaul's Drag Race is not about looking the most like a woman. The format of this show and its challenges have absolutely nothing to do with looking feminine, and never has. So to understand why what Ru's saying is ridiculous, you need to have an understanding of what the challenges on this show are like. So let's get into that. Typically the show is broken up into 3 sections: the mini challenge, the main challenge, and the runway. The mini challenge is usually something stupid, and it doesn't really seem to have any bearing on how well you're doing in the competition at all. If it's used for anything, it's to decide who are the team leaders in the main challenge. Mini challenges are like dance in a costume. Play with a puppet.
It's not that your clothes are ugly, it's just you're misshapen.
Insult each other.
Abor de lamo. Is that a hog on your body, or are you excited to see me?
Guess which of the pit crew is a top or a bottom.
Peter prefers his coffee black.
Oh.
I will put him on the top.
I don't think that there's like any titty advantage here. So let's move on. The main challenge is the most important part of the show and has the most bearing on who gets eliminated.
The Maxi Challenge is to create a soup that reflects who you are as a drag persona.
It could be writing lyrics about yourself, and then lip syncing those to a choreographed dance number. I'm Hellvetika and I'm here to slay. Sometimes you have to impersonate a celebrity.
It's rock and roll legend, Lil Richard!
Sew an outfit. Do a drag transformation on somebody else.
My daughter is a rebel. She skipped school to elope, and she borrowed mom's old leather jacket. She looks like Chucky's bride.
Or act in a poorly written comedy skit.
What's her problem?
I don't think titties are gonna push you over the finish line here either. Finally, we have the runway.
Looking smart and tartan.
Getting a reveal.
Oh, God.
Oh.
The runway is where queens are given a theme, and they have to walk the runway in an outfit that fits that theme. They're judged on how good that outfit looks, how well it's made, how well it fits the theme, how original their concept is. So here it seems possible that you can make an argument that a trans woman might have an easier time looking like cunt. But I think that this ignores just general biodiversity. Like, if you look at the different cis men that are competing in this competition, that theory falls apart pretty quickly. There are so many arguments you can make for certain people having an easier time looking good on the runway. And if I've noticed any bias on Drag Race, it has more to do with, like, weight and maybe race. The skinny queens usually tend to get away with more. It usually seems like the thinner and whiter a queen is, the better their fashion is perceived. Like, a plus-size queen could really not get away with some of the stuff I see these twinks bring to the runway. And if we really want to use the argument of trans women having, like, softer features or whatever as an unfair advantage, I think we can use some cis queens as examples of why this is already not really fair. Milk, seen here, stands around 7 feet in heels. He has a pretty stereotypically masculine-shaped body with a very low body fat percentage, and a face even the most skilled makeup artist is going to have some trouble softening. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Pheromone, who also identifies as a cis man, but has extremely soft features and easily passes as a cis woman. Is that fair? Well, kind of. Because when you look at what Drag Race judges the contestants on, it's frankly just not about appearing to be a woman. Previous winners have been all types of queens, and many of them don't resemble a woman at all. Like, they don't even remind me of a woman. There's one thing that Ru puts a lot of emphasis on when he's talking about trans women on his show, and that is titties. He seems a lot less concerned with people identifying as a woman, and a lot more concerned with whether they've had gender-affirming surgeries. To Ru, having titties is a huge advantage, and I can't figure out why. Like, is there some kind of scoring system I don't know about? When have they given extra points for titties? Ru is so adamant about this rule that contestant Gia Gunn actually put off her transition in order to compete on All-Stars. She knew she wouldn't be allowed to compete if she had the titty advantage. Because, I mean, clearly, we all know that Gia would have steamrolled that competition with her giant titties. Like, no one else would have stood a chance. What's even stranger to me is that breast augmentation surgery seems to be the only surgery that Ru really cares about. Many of his cis contestants who identify as men have had multiple surgeries to appear more feminine. Trinity Taylor has literally been on Botched.
I want a gallon on the top and a gallon on the bottom, and we're good, honey.
Chad Michaels has had how many surgeries to try to look like Cher? Detox has fake shoulders.
My cheeks done, and my lips done, my chin done, and my jawline done. My shoulders I've had.
Your shoulders?
How would this not be against the rules if transitioning is? It seems like the only place Ru draws the line is breasts. I don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, so besides that, Ru also seems to be very concerned with the optics of it. Going back to this statement from the Guardian interview, I think Ru has it in his head that there needs to be a very clear transition from man to woman for the irony of drag to be clear, and that a woman doing drag doesn't have that same fuck you feeling to a society that obsesses over masculinity. And I do think there's a little bit of a point here when you're talking about cis women. Taking drag kings as an example, I feel like a woman dressing up as a man doesn't have that same taboo feeling that a man dressing up as a woman has, just because, like, society hates women and loves men, so it's considered shameful to want to be a woman. A woman dressing as a man is just a little bit easier for them to digest for some reason. Like, just for example, I remember growing up and really wanting to play with, like, girly toys, and even though my parents never shamed me for that, I still had kind of internalized, just from what I had seen, that it was shameful and embarrassing for me to want to play with my Sailor Moon dolls. I don't think a little girl necessarily feels that same shame when they want to do, like, tomboy stuff. So I see it a little bit for cis women, but we're talking about trans women. And trans women have had to overcome, like, a society that thinks they shouldn't exist. Like, trans women have had to overcome the oppression of society to become who they are in a much more real way than a cis man dressing up as a woman for the night. And like, I get how the optics of a trans woman competing on Drag Race might be confusing to like an average, uneducated person. Like seeing a woman in a talking head portion and then have them transform into a more exaggerated version of a woman is probably not like the clearest narrative, but this show's been on for 13 seasons. People in my office speak in drag slang now because of the cultural impact of this show. They'll catch on. Like, maybe back in the first few seasons, I could have been convinced that it would be harmful to trans women as a whole to be viewed as drag queens on TV in like 2009 maybe. Just because some people were having difficulty knowing the difference between a trans woman and a drag queen. Like, maybe it would contribute to people thinking that it was the same thing. But at this point, I don't think that's a concern. There's too much awareness, and it's definitely not enough of a concern to ban trans women from the largest drag platform when it's an art form that they basically invented. And I mean, this idea that he's saying where like trans women doing drag has no sense of irony or danger. I mean, first of all, there's no more irony than a woman dressing up as a woman. But I mean, what is a bigger rejection of masculinity than becoming a trans woman? What's more dangerous than being a trans woman? Even for cis women who do drag, I think it's ironic to say that there's no fuck you to it. Because while society might not see a cis woman doing drag as breaking gender norms, within the drag community, cis male drag queens actually discriminate against cis women drag queens. They think they're faking it and don't have a right to it and are basically appropriating our culture. So in a roundabout way, doing something that you're told you shouldn't be able to do because of your gender is kind of a fuck you. I don't know, I just love cis women drag queens. I think they're great. Let them do it. Come on. You think you own this shit? Who are you? I mean, I'd even go as far to say that being a drag queen as a cis gay man in 2021, not all that radical. And depending on where you live, you might not even face all that much discrimination. It's clear to me that RuPaul is looking at the world through a very outdated lens. And the things he's saying don't really seem to mesh with the world we live in today. In the currently airing season 13, we actually have our first contestant who was cast knowing that they were transgender, Gottmik. However, Gottmik is a trans man, and while I'm glad that trans men are able to get on Drag Race, and I'm in full support for having more trans men on the show, I do feel as if maybe Ru is trying to use this to cover his tracks, while still upholding his idea of what an acceptable drag queen is. Because Gottmik has fully transitioned, he's on testosterone, he's got top surgery, he meets the requirements Ru has for drag queens. Requirements that still exclude trans women. So until a trans woman is cast, I don't really know if Ru is open to them being on the show yet. And I have to wonder, would a trans man be able to get on the show if they hadn't fully transitioned? What if they hadn't had top surgery? What if they weren't on testosterone? I think Ru is really invested in the transformation aspect, where there's a very distinct man-to-woman narrative. At its core, RuPaul's Drag Race is just a competition where people dress up to entertain. I don't really see why that would be limited to just cis men. The definition of a drag queen is just too fuzzy to try to gatekeep it at this point, and trying to limit that just seems pointless and hurts the careers of a lot of talented people that have a lot to offer. Drag Race is probably the most influential queer media ever, and trans women have every right to compete in an art form that they essentially created. And I think the show should just be open to everybody. Trans, cis, gay, straight, who cares? Is your drag cool? Do you have cool costumes? Isn't that just all we want? Are you funny? Anyway, those are my thoughts. I know people are gonna say, well, it's Ru's show, so Ru can do whatever he wants. But this is my YouTube channel, and I can say whatever I want, and this is my case against his decision. So, goodbye.